The Office on Arden Street. Tonight's episode, The Sterling Affair, a Rogue Lantern Studios production featuring members of the Mike Mob.
There are two kinds of women who walk through the door of the office on Arden Street. The first kind doesn't know what she's getting into. The second kind knows exactly what she's doing, and she's counting on you not to figure that out until it's too late. Vivian Sterling was the second kind. I knew it the moment she came up those stairs. The way she didn't hold the railing. The way she paused at the frosted glass just long enough to compose herself before she turned the knob. Most people who come to a private detective's office are nervous. Vivian Sterling was performing. I wrote down the time. 10:47 in the morning. I always write down the time. Jack says it's a habit that's never paid off. I say everything pays off eventually. She was going to make sure of that. She came in on a Tuesday. The radiator was arguing with itself in the corner. Jack had his feet off the desk for once, which meant he'd heard the heels on the stairs and decided to look like someone with posture. Good morning. Can I help you?
I'd like to speak with Mr. Webb. I don't have an appointment, but I was told he sees people without one.
He does. Your name?
Sterling. Vivian Sterling.
She said it the way a person says a name they've practiced saying calmly. I wrote it down. One moment, Miss Sterling. Jack was already standing when I opened the door. He'd heard the name too. Sterling. No appointment. Very composed.
How composed?
The kind that costs something. He nodded once. Then he straightened his jacket and went out to meet her. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. The door between us was old and the wood had warped in the frame over the years, which meant sound traveled between rooms the way rumor travels in a small building, easily and without apology. I kept my notebook open.
Mrs. Sterling, please, sit down.
Thank you for seeing me without notice.
That's fine. What can I do for you?
My husband is dead, Mr. Webb. 3 weeks ago. The police have ruled it an accident. He fell from the balcony of our home. We lived, on the 4th floor.
I'm sorry for your loss.
I didn't come for condolences. I came because I don't believe it was an accident.
A pause. Jack let it breathe the way he does when he's deciding whether to believe something.
What makes you say that?
My husband was not a careless man. He was deliberate in everything he did. He didn't lean against railings. He didn't stand near open windows. He was, if anything, overly cautious about that sort of thing.
People make mistakes.
Yes, and people are also pushed.
Do you have a reason to think that? Or is it a feeling?
Both, but I'll give you the reason. In the 6 months before his death, my husband became increasingly difficult to reach. Not socially. Publicly, he was fine. But privately, he was distracted. Worried about something he wouldn't name. There were phone calls he took in other rooms. There were evenings he came home later than he said he would.
You thought he was having an affair.
I considered it. Then I dismissed it. Raymond didn't have the temperament for it. Whatever was troubling him, it wasn't romantic.
The foundation.
There was a beat. A very small one. But I caught it. Even through a warped door.
I beg your pardon?
You and your husband ran a children's foundation. The Sterling Foundation. Am I remembering correctly?
Yes, for 11 years.
And the foundation is still operating?
It is. I'm overseeing it now.
Mrs. Sterling, when a man in your husband's position starts keeping secrets, it's usually one of three things. A woman, a debt, or money that's moving in the wrong direction. You've ruled out the first. I'm asking about the other two.
There may have been some financial irregularities. I'm still working through the books. That's part of why I'm here. I need to understand what Raymond was involved in before anyone else starts asking the same questions.
Who's already asking?
An insurance adjuster named Crowley, and a man I don't know the last name of. He calls himself Anthony. He's called the house twice.
Jack didn't write anything down. He never does in the room. He stores it. I'm the one who writes it down from the other side of the door. I wrote, Laura Crowley, Anthony, 2 calls to the house.
What is it you want me to do, Mrs. Sterling?
Find out who killed my husband. And find out what he was involved in before anyone else does.
Those 2 things might not have the same answer.
I know. That's why I need someone I can trust to hold both of them at once.
Another pause. Longer this time.
My rate is $20 a day plus expenses. I'll need 2 days up front.
That's fine.
And I need you to understand something before we go further. If I find something I don't like, I don't bury it. I tell you what I find. What you do with it after, that is your business. But I don't shape the truth to fit the story.
I wouldn't expect you to.
She said it without blinking. That was the thing about Vivian Sterling. She never blinked at the wrong moment. She blinked exactly when a person would blink, and not 1 second before or after. I marked that down too. The foundation kept offices in a building on Mercer, 2 floors above a dentist and below a firm of architects who had, according to Jack, never successfully completed a building. He went there the next morning. He told me about it that afternoon, standing in the door of my office with his hat in his hand, the way he does when he's thinking out loud.
The coordinator's name is Gilda Sinclair. Mid-30s. Keeps things moving. Looked like she hadn't slept since the funeral.
What did she say?
Plenty. And then, very carefully, not much.
He sat down across from me and I picked up my pen. This is how he told it. The foundation offices that morning.
Oh, Mr. Webb, Vivian called ahead and said you'd be coming. I want you to know that I'll cooperate in any way I can. This organization means a great deal to me. Whatever happened, whatever was happening, I want it resolved properly.
How long have you been with the foundation?
7 years. I started as a program associate. Raymond brought me up to coordinator 4 years ago, before the accident. I handled most of the daily operations.
And you reported to him directly?
To both of them. Vivian handles donor relations and public representation. Raymond handled the financial side. Or, he was supposed to.
What does that mean?
Well, in the last year, the reporting became less consistent. Raymond would approve disbursements that didn't correspond to any active program. When I asked, he told me there were consulting arrangements I wasn't aware of. I accepted that. I probably shouldn't have.
What kind of amounts are we talking?
I don't know the full picture. That's Walter's area, our bookkeeper. But enough that I noticed. Tens of thousands, I think. Maybe more. They moved in a way that looked right on the surface, but felt off.
Did you say anything to Vivian?
I mentioned it once. She said she would look into it, and that I shouldn't worry. That was 4 months ago.
And after Raymond died?
She came in the day after the funeral. Said the foundation would continue. Said everything was being reviewed and that I should keep things running as normal. She was very steady. I remember thinking it was remarkable how steady she was.
Jack let that sit for a moment.
Did Raymond seem frightened to you in the weeks before he died?
Well, I don't know. He seemed like a man trying to manage something that had gotten past him. Whether that was fear, I couldn't say. He stopped making jokes. He used to make terrible jokes. Then he stopped.
Jack thanked her and left. On the way out, he passed a man in the hall who looked at him the way men look at other men when they want to know what the conversation was about. Jack didn't stop. He came back to Arden Street and told me about it.
Get me what you can on Walter Franklin, and find out who handles the Foundation's outside audit, if they have one.
Already looking. He nodded and went into his office and didn't come out for an hour. Walter Franklin came to the Foundation the same year Gilda did, though by a different door. He had handled books for a municipal contractor before that, which explained how methodical he was, and possibly why he was so careful about what he admitted to knowing. Jack went back to Mercer the following day.
Mr. Webb, I was expecting you might come by. Gilda mentioned you'd been in.
I hope that's not a problem.
Not at all. I want to be helpful. I just want to be accurate. There are things I know and things I suspected, and I'd like to keep those in separate columns, if you'll allow it.
That's fair. Let's start with what you know.
I know that over the past 14 months, approximately $62,000 moved through the Foundation's accounts in ways that don't correspond to any program expenditure or vendor contract I was given documentation for. I raised this with Mr. Sterling in February. He told me the disbursements were tied to a consulting arrangement and that the paperwork was being handled separately. I asked again in April. He told me the same thing. In May, I stopped asking.
Why did you stop?
Because I didn't want to know the answer. I have a family, Mr. Webb. I've worked in this sector for 12 years. I know what it looks like when someone at the top of an organization is running something sideways. I chose not to see it.
And now?
Now, he's dead. And someone from the insurance company has been asking questions. And I'm sitting across from a private detective, and I think I should have asked louder in April.
The $62,000, where did it go?
To shell accounts, I believe. I traced 2 of the transfers as far as I could. They went into limited liability companies I couldn't find any record of. One had the name Crestline Partners. One was called Meridian Consulting Group. Neither appears in any state business registry I checked.
Was Vivian Sterling aware of these transfers?
Walter looked at his desk for a moment. Then he looked back up.
She signed 2 of the authorization forms. I assumed Raymond had briefed her. I still assume that, but I don't know what she was told.
I appreciate your time, Mr. Franklin.
Mr. Webb, whatever you find, I hope you'll consider that some people in this situation are witnesses, not participants.
I'll keep that in mind.
He kept it in mind. He also kept everything else Walter had said. Jack found Anthony Arcado the way you find men who don't advertise themselves. Through a series of people who each know a little less than they let on. The name Big Tuna was known in certain circles. Not feared exactly, but respected, the way a very quiet dog is respected. You don't know what it will do. You're careful not to find out. They met at a diner on 5th. Arcado was already there. He was always already there.
Mr. Webb, sit down. You want coffee? Coffee here is terrible.
I'm fine.
Suit yourself. I hear you're working for the widow.
I'm working a case. Who I'm working for is my business.
Fair enough. What can I do you for?
You called the Sterling house twice since Raymond Sterling died. I'd like to know why.
Because Raymond Sterling owed money to people I represent. And money doesn't stop being owed because a man falls off a balcony.
How much?
Not that it was worth my time to call. But not so much that it becomes something else if it's handled.
What did Sterling borrow for?
He had a habit. Not a terrible one by some standards, but it got ahead of him. Cards, mostly. He was a careful man about most things. But cards are patient. They wait.
Did you know about the foundation money?
I knew he had a foundation. Whether he was using it to cover what he owes me is his business. I don't ask where the money comes from. I ask when it's arriving.
Did Sterling tell you he was in trouble with the foundation accounts?
He told me, about 2 months before he died, that he needed more time. That something he'd been doing to manage things had started to unravel. He was nervous. More nervous than the amount warranted.
Did you have him killed, Mr. Ricardo?
The question sat on the table like a glass no one wanted to pick up.
Mr. Webb, a dead man can't pay. I have never, in my professional life, ever done something that stupid. Raymond Sterling was worth more to me breathing.
Can you prove where you were the night he died?
I was at a fundraiser for the city orchestra. I have photographs. My wife was with me. We stayed till 11.
I'll need to verify that.
I expect you would. I'll have someone send the particulars to your office.
He signaled for more coffee, which he had said was terrible, and drank it without apparent discomfort. He was a man entirely at peace with contradiction.
Mr. Webb, I'll tell you something for nothing. Raymond Sterling was afraid in his last few weeks. Not of me. He'd managed me fine for 3 years without much trouble. Whatever frightened him, it came from inside his own house.
His own house.
That's what I said.
Laura Crowley came to us. That surprised Jack, though he didn't show it. She called the office on a Wednesday afternoon and asked if she could stop by. Arrived at 3 o'clock sharp. I offered her tea. She declined. She sat across from me with her briefcase on her lap and her hands folded over it. And she looked around the office the way someone does when they're cataloging an environment, not admiring it. I didn't tell Jack she was coming until she was already in the chair. I wanted to see how he handled surprise. He handled it the way he handles most things, by acting as if he'd already expected it.
Mr. Webb, I'm Laura Crowley. I handle complex claims for Alderman Life and Casualty. The Sterling policy is mine.
I see. What brings you here, Miss Crowley?
I understand you've been retained by Vivian Sterling to investigate her husband's death. I'm not here to interfere with that. I'm here because I think we may have overlapping interests, and I'd rather have a conversation than work around each other.
What kind of policy are we talking about?
$240,000. Double indemnity clause for accidental death. The ruling from the coroner's office qualifies Raymond Sterling for the full amount.
But you have reservations.
I have questions. The circumstances are consistent with an accident. They're also consistent with something else. I'm not saying they're inconsistent with anything. I'm saying they're not definitively one thing.
What specifically gives you pause?
The railing height at the point where he fell is 44 inches. Sterling is 5 feet 10. For him to go over that railing accidentally, in a way that left no defensive contact marks on the railing itself, requires a particular kind of motion. Stumbling forward, drunk or incapacitated, the toxicology found nothing. Losing footing in the dark, the exterior light on that side of the balcony was functioning. It's not impossible. Nothing about it is impossible. But it's inconvenient as an accident.
Have you spoken with Vivian Sterling?
Twice. She's cooperative and very clear in her account. Her account has not changed between the first conversation and the second. Not once. Most bereaved spouses modify their account slightly. Small details shift. Memory is imperfect. Hers is not.
You find consistency suspicious.
I find perfect consistency unusual. There's a difference.
Jack was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I hadn't expected.
Miss Crowley, are you sharing this with me because you want my help, or because you want to know what I know?
Both. I won't pretend otherwise. But I'll tell you this. If Raymond Sterling was murdered, I have both the means and the obligation to hold the claim until that's established. Which means Vivian Sterling doesn't collect? Not soon? Possibly not ever.
And if I find something?
Then I would appreciate knowing. In return, I'll share anything from my investigation that might be useful to yours.
That's a reasonable arrangement.
I thought you'd think so.
She stood, shook his hand, and left. She nodded to me on the way out. I nodded back. We understood each other, I think. We were both women in rooms full of things men thought they were managing. That evening, Jack spread everything out across his desk. I know because I brought him coffee and he didn't notice when I set it down. He was looking at 4 pieces of paper arranged in a row. I have done this work long enough to know a moment a case changes shape. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It looks like a man staring at paper and forgetting his coffee.
$62,000 from the foundation. Shell accounts. Vivian signed 2 of the authorization forms.
She told you she was still working through the books.
She told me Raymond might have been involved with irregularities. She didn't mention she'd signed anything herself.
Maybe she forgot.
Vivian Sterling doesn't forget things. She omits them.
I sat down across from him. The insurance.
$240,000, double indemnity. That's 4 times what Raven moved through the foundation.
A way to pay it back. Or to come out ahead.
Accardo said whatever frightened Raymond came from inside his own house. Not from the debt, not from the foundation's scrutiny, from inside.
She found out what he was doing.
Or he found out what she was doing. Or both. $62,000 missing. A husband who starts taking calls in private. A wife with a perfect memory and a very clear account of where she was when he went off the balcony.
She was in the kitchen. She heard the sound. She found him.
She was in the kitchen.
A long silence settled in the room. Outside, the street traffic moved the way it always does at that hour. Indifferently, without knowing anything about what was happening 2 floors up. Jack.
I know.
What are you going to do?
I'm going to have one more conversation.
She came back on a Thursday. I'd called and asked her to. I told her Jack had something to report. That was true, though not in the way she expected. She wore gray this time. The first day she'd worn black. Small detail. I don't know what it meant. I wrote it down anyway. Jack came out to meet her himself and brought her into his office. I didn't close the connecting door.
Good morning. You said you had something.
I do. Sit down, Mrs. Sterling.
I'd rather stand.
Sit down.
She sat.
Your husband was taking money from the foundation. $62,000. Moved through shell companies called Crestline Partners and Meridian Consulting Group. Walter Franklin traced 2 of the transfers before he lost the thread. He raised the issue with Raymond twice and was told it was a consulting arrangement. He stopped asking.
I know. I know about the transfers. I told you there were irregularities.
You told me Raymond was involved in irregularities. You didn't mention you signed 2 of the authorization forms.
A pause. Very small. Very controlled.
I signed whatever Raymond put in front of me. I trusted him.
Mrs. Sterling, those weren't routine disbursements. They were transfers to shell accounts that don't exist in any state registry. A woman who manages donor relationships and public representation for an 11-year-old foundation doesn't sign that kind of paperwork without reading it.
You don't know that.
I know you. I've spent a week watching how you operate. You don't sign things you haven't read. You don't walk into rooms you haven't prepared for. You don't answer questions you haven't already considered.
What are you saying?
I'm saying you knew what Raymond was doing. Maybe you helped build it. Maybe you realized what it meant when the foundation came under scrutiny. Maybe you realized $62,000 missing from a nonprofit tied to your signatures was going to be very difficult to explain. And maybe you realized that a grieving widow with a $240,000 insurance policy was a cleaner story than what was actually happening.
The room was very quiet. Outside the window, someone on the street below was arguing cheerfully about something that had nothing to do with any of this.
That's a serious accusation.
It's not an accusation. It's a description. I'm telling you what I found, what I believe happened. You came to me because you needed someone to contain this, and because you knew that a detective you hired was someone you could manage.
And can I?
No.
She looked at him for a long moment. And then something shifted in her face. It wasn't guilt, exactly. It was something more complicated than that. It was the expression of a person who has been waiting for a particular thing to happen and is relieved, in a terrible way, that it finally has.
Raymond was going to confess. He decided he couldn't keep managing it. He was going to go to the board, to the state, to anyone who would listen. He said he needed to clear his conscience. He said he couldn't keep living the way we were living.
And you couldn't let him?
Everything I have, Mr. Webb. Everything I rebuilt after the first time we lost it all. It was going to be taken again. Not because of anything I had done wrong, but because he decided that his conscience was worth more than our life.
So you made a different decision.
It was raining that night. He was standing on the balcony. He did that sometimes when he wanted to think. I came up behind him. We argued. It didn't take long.
She said it the way you say something you've been carrying alone for weeks. Not like a confession, more like setting down a bag that had grown too heavy.
The insurance money
would have covered what was missing and left enough to keep things running. No one would have looked any further. Gilda would have kept the foundation going. Walter would have been reassured. Crowley would have signed off on the insurance payout.
Except Crowley didn't, and Accardo wouldn't let it rest. And you hired a detective who didn't stay managed.
No, you didn't, did you?
I told you when you walked in here that I don't shape the truth to fit the story.
You did. I believed you. I hired you anyway.
Why?
She thought about that. For the first time since I'd known her, she seemed to be thinking about something she hadn't already decided.
Because I was tired. Because carrying it alone is exhausting. And because somewhere underneath all of it, I suppose I needed someone to find me.
Jack looked at her for a long moment. And then 3 hard knocks at the outer door. I knew before I opened it. The way you know sometimes. You get a feeling in the back of your teeth. 2 people. Plain clothes, but the kind of plain that announces itself. One of them I recognized. Detective Harlan from the 4th Precinct. She'd been in the building before, on an older case. She nodded at me the way you nod when you're being professional about something uncomfortable.
Miss Finch, is Mr. Webb in?
He is. And so is his client. Harlan glanced at her partner. Something passed between them. Then she looked back at me.
We're going to need to speak with both of them.
I stepped aside. They came in. The outer office felt smaller with them in it. Everything does at that moment. The radiator had stopped its argument. Even it knew enough to be quiet. I heard Jack's voice from the inner office, low and even.
Come in, Harlan. We've been expecting you.
That was not entirely true. But it was the kind of thing Jack says when he wants a moment to feel like it had been his idea. Vivian Sterling stood when they entered. She looked at the 2 detectives the way she looked at everything. Carefully, measuring the distance between where she was and where she had expected to be. Then she straightened her jacket, and she walked out of the office on Arden Street for the last time, with an escort to the local station, without being told to, and without looking back. I watched her go. Then I sat down, and I wrote down the time. 3:41 in the afternoon. I always write down the time. The Sterling Foundation closed 4 months later. Gilda Sinclair found a position with a different organization across the river. Walter Franklin cooperated fully with the state inquiry and was not charged with anything, which is what happens when you're a witness and not a participant, and you're lucky enough to have a detective who remembers the difference. Laura Crowley declined the claim. She sent Jack a note. It said, "Good work." 2 words. She was not a woman who required more than that. Anthony Arcado collected what was owed to him from Raymond Sterling's estate, pennies on the dollar, and was reportedly satisfied. Or, as satisfied as a man like that gets. Jack Webb took 2 days off after the case closed. He came back on the 3rd day, put his hat on the rack, and sat down at his desk. He didn't talk about it. He rarely talks about the ones that end that way. I think about Vivian Sterling sometimes, not with sympathy exactly, but with the particular attention you give to someone who was very good at something and used it badly. She was the most controlled person I have ever watched come apart. She did it quietly and cleanly, and at the moment of her own choosing. There's a kind of dignity in that. Terrible kind. The kind that doesn't excuse anything. She hired a detective she thought she could manage. She was right about everything except him. That's the thing about this office. People come in carrying the truth like something they want to hand off to someone else. We always give it back.